Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Have you ever tried to break a bad habit and just think you don't have the self-control to accomplish that? And even though you try to resist temptation and everything you possibly can, you still go back to the same thing? Self-control is not the answer. Let me tell you why and explain. So today we are going to be going over chapter 7 of this amazing book, Atomic Habits. I think the information on here is just extremely valuable. So we are currently in the first law, and the first 3 chapters of that explains how to create a good habit. But we finally got to a chapter that I think is going to be very useful for us who are trying to break bad habits. Me, for example, I am trying so hard not to smoke cigarettes anymore. After reading this book, I feel like it set a plan for me to get rid of that habit. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So the example that the book provides is service members that were in Vietnam. So during Vietnam, these service members, in their environment, it was very stressful. They had access to heroin around them. Their friends were doing heroin. So it was just kind of the thing to do there in order to cope with everything that's going on. So what ended up happening, they did a study, and Lee Robbins was the head researcher of this study. And they found out that 35% of service members tried heroin during their service in Vietnam. And 20% of those service members were addicted. So what is extremely interesting about this is how much your environment impacts you. What do I mean? When these service members were done with their duties, they went back home to their families. And they were no longer exposed to the people who did heroin. It wasn't as easily accessible. They probably didn't even know how to get it at home. And the change of their environment pretty much got rid of their addiction overnight. So they went ahead and studied the service members more after they came back home. And it turns out 9 out of 10 of those got rid of their addiction overnight. And only about 5% of those became re-addicted in a year, 12% relapsed in 3 years. So approximately 9 out of 10 who used heroin eliminated their addiction overnight. So what is it that made them get rid of this addiction? Because heroin is one of the most addictive drugs out there. So the change was the environment. They weren't exposed to those cues that would trigger them to use heroin. Once they came home, they weren't doing that at home, so they didn't find a need to do that anymore. So let's go ahead and try the reverse, right? So this was an example with service members who in their environment were exposed to heroin, and then when they came back home, that those cues weren't there anymore, so they stopped using. So let's give an example of a drug user who is a heroin addict at home. They hang out with their friends, and that's where they get their drugs. And their environment, in a sense, got them to get this addiction. So a lot of these people end up going into a rehab, and their environment completely changes. They're no longer exposed to these friends, they're no longer exposed to these drugs, and they are set with a plan to get rid of this addiction. So they spend time in this rehab facility, and they end up getting clean. What ends up happening is they get released to go back home, and they end up being exposed to the same environment that got them into that situation in the first place. And sadly, about 90% of those heroin addicts end up being addicted again. So the big thing that is being learned from this is that your environment has a huge impact on the behavior you do, all the good and the bad habits, which is what we've been talking about in the last couple of videos. So I found this very interesting to see. It says here, a habit that has been encoded in the mind is ready to be used whenever this relevant situation arises. So what does this mean? It provides another example. It talks about this lady who every time she went horseback riding, she would go ahead and light a cigarette. So she decided to quit smoking. And she stopped going horseback riding because that was something that would trigger her to go ahead and start smoking. So she was able to accomplish to quit smoking, and years later, about 20 years later, she went back horseback riding, and then she, for a reason, felt the craving to smoke a cigarette again. So she was exposed to the same cues that she was exposed to in the past that would have her smoke cigarettes. So your body says, hey, I used to ride this horse and it made me feel good when I smoked a cigarette. So let's go ahead and remind the human, you, to go ahead and pick up that cigarette. After she realized that, that these certain cues would trigger that, she stopped going horseback riding altogether. So obviously, you know, we can't always just change our entire environment. You can't just like change locations and start fresh again, but you could do certain things that will help you. So making things a little more difficult. So for example, I saw this video of this lady who quit smoking cigarettes after reading this book, and she just said, you know, I'm not going to say I'm not ever going to smoke cigarettes again. I'm just not going to buy them anymore. So after she stopped smoking the pack of cigarettes, then she just didn't buy anymore. And if someone offered it to her, she'll smoke it, but she just didn't go out of the way to go and buy some. And what I'm trying to do is keep myself busy and fill in the gaps of when I usually smoke cigarettes. So in the morning I would go to smoke a cigarette. I'm doing something else. So I'm trying to replace that with meditation or reading or something else. It's honestly really hard because your body needs it, the nicotine, but it's small steps. So it says here the cues were still internalized. She just hadn't been exposed to them in a long time. Once a habit has been encoded, the urge to act follows whenever the environment cues appear. Showing pictures of, so this can also be backfire. So for example, let's say you want to get a smoker to stop smoking and you start showing them videos of black lungs and like people dying with holes, like that can cause anxiety and stress. And what do these smokers use cigarettes for? To release stress. So when that happens, they are triggered to go smoke a cigarette. So it can also be negative. So like, you know, shaming someone for being overweight or obese, obviously that's not right. But doing that, it's going to give them anxiety and they're going to want to find comfort. And what gives these people comfort is food. So they're going to go eat food and then they just fall back. So sometimes negative comments and things like that are not going to be very helpful. It's better to help them maybe change their environment. So people who just resist the temptation and have self-control, it seems like they don't struggle as much, but they do struggle as much as we do. And they may actually struggle a lot more. It's best to just change your environment around you so you aren't in need to do those bad behaviors. So this is pretty much the inversion of the first law. So the first law is to make it obvious, to try to make things obvious so you can try and do those behaviors. So in my last video, I gave some examples of things I do to make myself drink more water, for me to go to the gym. So it was explaining in the first law how to create good behaviors. So in this chapter, it's saying to reverse that first law and make it invisible. So don't trigger yourself to do these bad behaviors. So if it's cigarettes, maybe don't leave the cigarette box outside, make it difficult, or don't buy these cigarettes anymore at all. And just think about, what is this really going to do for me and benefit me in the long term? So it's really hard. I know breaking bad habits is very difficult. Even when I quit smoking cigarettes for 2 years, every single day I thought about cigarettes. And the thing is that we have to accept that these habits are going to be embedded in our brain forever. And you just have to learn to accept that and make sure you don't expose yourself to certain places or things that will make you act in these, make you do these bad behaviors again. So it takes a lot of time. I mean, I've smoked cigarettes since I was 14. It's part of my life. So it's kind of like taking something away that I do all the time and me getting used to. So I'm trying to reprogram myself with doing a schedule and different things. So I'm following the guidelines here. I'll keep you guys updated and see if I was able to get rid of this bad habit. And I'm also trying to develop better habits. I created a calendar, a schedule that just outlines my entire day. That way it just flows and I don't think about it, and I just make sure I do these activities and I don't get distracted. Well, I really hope you learned something from this chapter. I am really enjoying reviewing these the chapters and dissecting them with you. What I found is a lot of the times when I would read these books, I would completely understand it while I'm reading it, but then at the end of the book, like I didn't fully remember everything anymore. And over years, like I just don't remember. Like I read Think and Grow Rich, I read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I don't really remember the content. So I'm hoping doing this will help me become more of an avid reader, and it will help me digest the information. and sharing it with you guys. And I hope we all just learn together. And I appreciate you guys being here and watching this. If you guys like this content, if you guys can subscribe, that would be great. I would really appreciate it. And I will see you guys on the next video when we go over chapter 8. Thank you so much and have a great one. Goodbye.